So as I was preparing for my next chat, I actually, well, full disclosure for the Pepsi folks, I have a friend that works at Pepsi, and I said that I was coming to this conference this week, and I mentioned that I was going to get to interview Dr. Mehmood Khan. He's one of the vice chairmen there, and he's the chief scientific officer for global research. And she was so excited. And I thought, wow, this Pepsi employee is really, she said, he's amazing, he's driving so much change at our company. And as I was prepping this morning, kind of getting my head in the right place for this, I was poking around the wires and noticed Bloomberg had a story on Pepsi. And they were praising the fact that 45% of the revenue in its latest reporting period was from, quote, healthy foods. Because I think most of us still think of Pepsi as a very, you know, think of the fizzy water, Coke and Pepsi. But for the last 10 years, this company has been operating around this philosophy, performance with purpose. And here to talk about the progress they've made and where they're going is Dr. Mehmood Khan. Please, Dr. Khan. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Please have a seat. You didn't know my friend worked there. I won't tell you her name.
But now I want to know.
Yeah, no, I will later. But she was
the one fan I've got.
She was super excited. And I think that
I do want David's job, though. I forgot my sandals.
You forgot your flip-flops. I did too. But it is exciting for me to have you here because and Dr. Khan, I discovered that you, and I have to make reference to this because not many people have a chief sort of scientific officer who has a medical background. You're an I know you spent some time in endocrinology. Why is that really help informing the view that you bring to Pepsi?
So I practiced endocrinology at the Mayo Clinic. So not only did I study it, I taught it, and all the rest of it. Look, I've always asked myself, and I started my career before endocrinology, the College of Food Science and Agriculture at the University of Minnesota. So I've sort of come full 360 degrees. But if you're going to think about the human and how to feed the human, you'd think physicians might have a role in that.
You'd think so. I'm glad they made that decision. So performance with purpose, for those of you who don't know it, is sort of based on three interconnected priorities. Improving the products that Pepsi sells, protecting our planet, empowering people and the communities around the world. And I'm just curious, what was the business rationale for this sort of philosophy and galvanizing around that philosophy?
So as you mentioned, we didn't just suddenly think of this last year. Indra Nooyi became CEO in 2007,
right?
About 10 years ago. And one of the first things she articulated was that we're going to perform as a business, we're going to make money, but we're going to have performance with purpose. It wasn't just about making money, but it was about how we're going to make money. And this was good for the business, that's the performance side, but you can't have a long-term sustainable growth business in any sector, in particular in food and beverage, if you're not thinking about what you're making, how you're making it, where you're growing your crops, and ultimately the livelihood of everybody in the supply chain all the way up to the farmer that's growing the initial crops. A healthy society means healthy businesses. It was that simple.
So I was pouring through the latest update to your priorities, and there's quite a few of them, way more than we can discuss in this 20 minutes, but one of the things I really honed in on was the water stewardship. So can you detail what your priorities are there and why that was selected, and some of the other ones and why they were selected?
So water is critical, obviously, not only as a basic human right, and we're proud of the fact that PepsiCo was one of the first large companies to recognize water as a human right, even before the United Nations recognized it. And water not only from consumption point of view for our own individual well-being, but for our communities. And that water, as we step back, where is water used? As just what everybody in this room knows. 80%, 70 to 80% of the world's freshwater use is in the production of food on the farm. And so if we're going to sustain our population, and we all talk about this 7 billion going to 9.5 billion, how are you going to feed them? You can't feed them without adequate water. We have to become water stewards. So it started with that in terms of maintenance of our global food supply, security of our global food supply, and it's very interrelated. I don't think we can talk about any of these components, greenhouse gases, environmental protection, water, energy, independently anymore. That's the past.
So you have another, pull out another goal, the packaging and waste. Design 100% of packaging to be recoverable or recyclable and partner to increase recovery and recycling rates. These are some of the new goals that you just set. What do you mean by recoverable? What does that mean?
So look, when we think about designing a product, you can either recycle it and use it again,
right,
or you can take the materials and repurpose them into a different use. Or you could actually reconfigure them into another container. There's multiple ways of doing it. And so there are technical differences between recycling versus recovering. But there's a common theme here, which means we have to partner with society to make sure the materials that we've designed to be recyclable or recoverable actually do get recycled. And there's a lot of opportunity on the consumer side, but also on the infrastructure side.
Can you give me do you have something that's benefited from being recovered? Can you mention a product?
We are the world's largest user of recycled PET.
Okay.
Right, which comes obviously from beverage containers. Could we use more? Absolutely. Do we have the systems to be able to, take them back from the supply chain into manufacturing again? They don't exist, and it varies by where you are in the world. I mean, as many of you in this room know, the US doesn't have a very good track record when it comes compared to other developed worlds. Our recycling rates in the US are lower than Canada's, significantly lower than Western Europe. Are the consumers really that different between Western Europe, Canada, and North America, or US? Probably not as much as we think. Are the infrastructure systems in place? Is there a culture of doing that? Obviously different.
So what do you do? What does Pepsi need to do to assist with that?
Yeah. So I look at this in three components. One, nothing happens unless the product is designed to be recyclable. If it can't be recycled, it doesn't matter what else you have. We've got to do our part. The second is partner with organizations and society to understand what will it take to increase recycling. Is it consumer education? Is it labeling? Is it waste management? And we're working on all of those components through partnerships. And then ultimately design our manufacturing capabilities through our suppliers to take what comes in and then repurpose it in. It's the circular economy we've all been talking about. Industry has one piece of that circle.
So you mentioned that US could stand to have some more work done. Are there places where you feel like you've made a significant amount of progress that could be a model?
Look, I gave you the example of Western Europe. Western Europe recycling rates, on average, are 2 times or greater than that of the US.
Right.
Just by emulating some of those systems, we have a lot to learn.
So when Pepsi, just kind of step back and look at what outside views inform your strategy. You just set this new 2025 agenda. What external research or benchmarks or inspirations were used to help set those priorities?
So it's a great question. The first thing we sat down, and I had the privilege of chairing the team that ultimately wrote the goals. And we looked at this and said, these can't be Pepsi's goals. These are the goals that are based on the science where it's available, the evidence where it's available from outside agencies. We started with a number of them. Of course, the UN SDGs,
right.
Critical benchmark. And every one of our goals is mapped to one of the UN SDG goals, right? So that's one starting place. The second is we looked at the science, and I'll give you an example. If we take water, we have made a lot of progress in water internally at PepsiCo. Some of you may know, 2 years ago, PepsiCo won the Stockholm Water Prize. So we were leading the industry and have been leading the industry for the last almost decade. We cut our water use internally by 26% in terms of operational efficiency. It's not enough. We committed to another 25% on top of that in terms of our internal operations. But what we did was we asked ourselves, how much water does Pepsi's footprint really look like? Well, if we look at all the water we use in every single plant around the world, that accounts for 7% of Pepsi's footprint. Manufacturing, our beverages, everything combined is about 7%. The other 93% happens to be on the farms, the process of growing our crops, whether it's oats or it's oranges, it's corn, whichever you take, that's where the water is. Mm-hmm. So if we were to eliminate all of our water use, that still wouldn't touch 93%. So we looked at that science and said, what will it take? And that's where the 15% came. Said if we can eliminate 15% of the water used in water-distressed areas around the world on the farm, that's more than equal to every single drop of water that Pepsi uses. So not only will we cut 25% of our internal, we'll also eliminate 15% from the farm, which, as you know, is massive. So that's the science that we use to drive this, as an example.
Right. So that, points to your supply chain, which is the farmers, obviously, and other suppliers, other manufacturing partners, and so forth around the world. What resources, when I think about the Sustainable Development Goals, you hear a lot of, and I'm so excited to have companies like Pepsi and MasterCard and all of these massive multinationals really drawing attention to these goals. How do you help that smaller organization that maybe doesn't really understand these goals? I mean, what resources can they get from Pepsi? You mentioned some of the things you'd like to do. How is Pepsi helping that farmer?
So let me give you an example. One of the things, farmers in our supply chain, just like any large company, come in different shapes and sizes. Right. All over the world. Farming is a global, in fact, it's the world's largest occupation. We looked at PepsiCo's global footprint, and we recognize there are about 9 million acres of farming activity supporting PepsiCo's business today. And obviously that will grow. What we've done is we've launched, as an example of this, an initiative called a Sustainable Farming Initiative, where we've created a platform for farmers around the world to be able to upload their data on their practices: yield, water use,
right.
Fertilizer use, carbon footprint, labor practices. And I want to come back to that. This
right.
is not just environment. And as they upload that information, it's accumulating into a very large data set, which we can then provide them reports. Let me give you, initially we thought, well, why would a farmer want to do this? It's, sit there entering data. That's not what you imagine Farmer Joe to do. Well, you might be surprised that we already have 28,000 farmers in 15 countries actually sharing their data. So that's already 1 million acres worth out of that 9. Our goal is to map 7 million acres of practices around the world by 2025. What's the return on this? We launched an initiative in the United Kingdom. The southeast of England is going through a water shortage, and that's where a significant amount of our potato farmers for the UK market are. We launched an initiative called 50 by 5, and using this platform, partnering with Cambridge University and the United Nations, which is hosting this data set in partnership, we started this initiative and we said, over 5 years, we want you to take every capability we know how, we PepsiCo and the ecosystem knows how to have best practices, and cut your water use by 50%. Well, I can tell you, as of now, they achieved a 50% reduction in water use and greenhouse gas production, and at the same time increase yield by this practice. So we know the technologies exist. It's about understanding how to use them, how to configure them, and deploy them. Imagine the global impact of something like that.
Right. And I think this is where you're going with this, but one of the things that I, again, noted when I was reading is that these goals are interconnected. The Sustainable Development Goals are not just about climate or the planet. They're about social issues. They're about inclusion. The progress that you made on that, what's the ripple effect from a social and economic standpoint? How does that play out?
So we've made a very bold commitment there. I think sometimes it goes below the radar screen because we'd all like to see the numbers around carbon and
right.
water. We have at PepsiCo a code of conduct for all of our employees. It's a practice, and every PepsiCo employee, wherever you are in the world, has the right to be treated under that code of conduct. One thing the team noticed was that if you were a supplier to PepsiCo, whether you were a franchise partner, a supplier, all the way up to the farm, you had no legal requirement, or your employer as a supplier didn't have a legal requirement to be treated under that code of conduct. We've announced under the PWP 25 that by 2025, every single supplier of ours will be expected to comply to our code of conduct all the way to their farm worker. That is huge. Now, it's going to take thousands and thousands of contracts to be rewritten as they come up for renewal, which is why we need the time. But we felt it was time to put a stick in the ground.
So you're going to hold people accountable.
It's going to be a requirement that our code of conduct applies to our suppliers now. That's a huge step forward. If nothing else, just think about child labor.
Right.
Think about bonded labor. Think about labor practices. Code of conduct is going to cover those. And if PepsiCo can do it, you're talking about, we're hoping others will follow now. That should become the global norm. Every human being has a right to some basic rights. Water, labor practices, decent income, at least to be able to support themselves, etc.
I think I know why my friend was so excited. When these goals were set out, you mentioned, and I quote, "We purposefully set the bar high, creating targets that won't be easy to achieve, including some that will require us to partner with others in bold new ways." End quote. Can you provide an example of that partnership? Have you gone there yet? What are you going to look for in these collaborators, other than obviously this same code of conduct?
So we've started, look, it's easy to say, it would have been very easy to sit down and say, tell me everything we know how to do, and let's make a commitment to it. That's not progress. That's basically doing what you already know what to do. I'm a scientist. There are some areas, let's take a look at water use. I gave you an example, greenhouse gas emissions as an example. Some technologies we have line of sight to. It's a case of execution, deployment, capital investment, all of those critical inputs, but we'll have to figure it out. The second side of this was the fact that there are some areas we have no line of sight to a technical solution. In that case, we're partnering. And without going through individual partners, I've signed more than 50 agreements between PepsiCo and technology partners, large and small, including startups, multinationals. Over 50 agreements have been signed to co-develop solutions where they don't exist. It's going to take a village. It's not going to take one company. It's going to take a village.
Elaine, I forgot to queue you up for questions, but I'm hoping there are some. Can I take one?
Yes, many. So one hot topic that we're getting all over Twitter and virtual is about health. So specifically about your product strategy to create maybe healthier products, and then also serving the communities that are disenfranchised in terms of access to healthcare or education, nutritional habits of children, especially in Hispanic communities, et cetera. It's a big question, but
pick a part.
Let me take the second part first. Look, I've been practiced medicine and been an educator in medicine. I trained physicians for 20 years of my career. So I do understand what it takes to educate, and believe me, it's very difficult. I always used to say you'd never find an overweight doctor if knowledge was the only barrier. Okay? That's not just enough. It takes much more than that. The key is, it's not our job, and the day I took the role at PepsiCo, it's no longer my job to educate. I can partner with organizations, and we are. We partner with American Heart, American Diabetes, a variety of organizations around the world, WHO, where it makes sense, and we have expertise to provide, and they need our support in that. We'll do that. But reaching to the community, one thing we do, and I'm very proud of a program our team launched about 5 years ago, and if you want to look it up on the web, called Food for Good. A group of young employees at PepsiCo came to us and said, do you realize in the US, every summer, there are millions of children who actually have no meal all day because the school lunch is no longer available to them. So from the start of the summer holiday to the end, their school lunch is gone. And they are in broken homes in inner cities, and and yet those are same communities where our distribution capability already exists. So we launched a program called Food for Good. We launched it in one city 5 years ago in Texas. Initially, I thought, well, why would kids come up to a food truck which includes everything that fits the US Department of Agriculture's definition of a healthy meal? That program has now served millions of meals over the last 5 years in more than a dozen cities, and it's growing. In fact, the White House recognized it as one of the best practices of that industry, social, community partnership of reaching the underserved where the public sector alone can't do it. Together, we've touched the lives of hundreds of thousands of children through this process. So we are working to do that.
Dr. Khan, you mentioned that you're going to hold your suppliers and other business partners accountable for how they behave and operating against many of your philosophies. Who holds Pepsi accountable?
Ultimately, first of all, I think our consumers hold us accountable. People in this room hold us accountable. But at the management side and at the board level, it starts, every employee is engaged in PWP 25, a Performance with Purpose 2025. It's been part of our fabric for a decade. We recruit young people into the company because they want to work on this. It's energized our employees. What's amazing is, out of all the different organizations that report into me, some of the brightest, smartest, most energetic people are the ones who are submitting CVs into my team saying, I want to work on the PWP team. And that is how I know they're holding us accountable. The last bit I'll say from a structure point of view, we have a board accountability, we have a board subcommittee now on sustainability. Our entire executive committee has regular reviews on sustainability, and then ultimately then we have a team whose job is really facilitating and communicating internally. But this is the job of the executive committee and the board.
I'm sorry I only have 20 minutes to do this. Please thank Dr. Khan for giving us some time today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.